Just one breath of this air can freeze your lungs in seconds. I can't feel my hands anymore. Please, help me. Shh, just breathe. But do you hear that silence? Across the United States, a strange fracture is silently unfolding. Not in one place, not at a single moment, but simultaneously, relentlessly, and with an unprecedented pressure. Record-breaking ice storms are crushing power grids and burying entire cities, while floods swallow even the sturdiest of homes. Your heater is still running, your lights are still on, but don't be fooled. In 2026, the protective shell of our world has truly begun to shatter. In the last 72 hours, the unthinkable has become a documented reality. The Texas power grid, once the symbol of industrial independence, has buckled, plunging millions into a frozen, hollow silence. In the heart of the Midwest, massive steel-reinforced warehouses, structures we assumed were invincible, have folded like paper under a weight they were never engineered to carry. In Oregon and Washington, state-of-the-art communication towers have snapped under the sheer pressure of unyielding ice, severing the digital tether we rely on for our very sense of reality. These are not isolated accidents. They are systemic failures occurring simultaneously, relentlessly, and at a scale that defies our modern understanding of safety. We have lived for generations under a comforting, yet dangerous illusion. We believed that if we poured enough concrete and forged enough steel, we could create a sanctuary where the laws of nature no longer applied to us. We used our technology as a shield, a way to distance ourselves from the raw, unpredictable power of the elements. We built a world of climate-controlled rooms and 24-hour electricity, assuming the grid was an infinite, unshakable force. But in 2026, those shields are proving to be brittle. The snowfall we are witnessing today is not the manageable powder of our childhood memories. It is a dense, suffocating weight, a heavy snow that experts are struggling to classify. It presses down on the very symbols of our security, our hospitals, our transport hubs, and the roofs over our families' heads. When a modern shopping center collapses without warning, or a major highway becomes a graveyard of abandoned, frozen vehicles, it is more than a news headline. It is a physical manifestation of our helplessness. It is the sound of our material armor being stripped away, inch by agonizing inch. We have spent decades refining our comfort, assuming that as long as we had a thermostat and a thick wall, we were safe. But a wall is only as strong as the environment it stands in. As the ice thickens and the transformers explode in the night like dying stars, a deeper, more unsettling truth emerges. Our physical structures were built on the assumption of a stable world, a world that no longer exists. We used our machines to isolate ourselves from the earth, believing we had mastered it. But as the lights flicker and the heat fades, we are forced to confront the reality that we have become prisoners of our own infrastructure. When the steel groans and the power fails, the barrier between us and the abyss disappears. The shields are falling, the barriers are breaking, and as the cold moves from the streets into the very hallways of our homes, a question begins to echo in the darkness. If our concrete, our steel, and our technology can no longer protect us, what do we truly have left to hold on to? Have we spent our lives building a fortress of sand, only to realize the tide is finally coming in? While the ground beneath our feet becomes a battlefield of ice and water, many are finding that the greatest disturbance is not happening on the land, but in the heavens above. For thousands of years, the transition from day to night was the one constant humanity could rely on, a sacred boundary that offered rest, reflection, and a sense of order. But across vast stretches of the American landscape, that boundary is dissolving. For 72 consecutive hours, darkness has failed to arrive. Instead, the sky is being held in a state of false dawn, a cold, artificial glow that stretches from horizon to horizon, refusing to let the stars appear. Scientists and government agencies have stepped forward with explanations, but their data often feels like a shield meant to hide a much larger truth. According to the latest reports from NOAA, we have officially entered the peak of solar cycle 25. This 11-year cycle of solar activity is currently producing an unprecedented frequency of X-class solar flares, the most intense category of electromagnetic radiation our sun can emit. These flares release billions of tons of charged plasma, hurtling toward Earth at speeds exceeding 4 million miles per hour. When this electromagnetic surge strikes our magnetosphere, it does more than just disrupt our satellites or flicker our power lines. It illuminates the upper atmosphere in a persistent, ghostly radiance that science calls sky glow, but which the human spirit recognizes as something deeply unnatural. At the same time, we must confront a reality that is rarely discussed in the evening news. Humanity is no longer a passive observer of the atmosphere. We have entered the era of geo-engineering, a global effort to program the climate itself. Projects involving stratospheric aerosol injection are no longer theoretical. They are active. We are pumping millions of tons of reflective particles into the sky, attempting to create a man-made shield to dim the sun and cool the earth. We have treated the heavens like a piece of software, believing that with enough data and enough technology, we could master the very air we breathe. But as the night sky vanishes, we are forced to ask, are we truly in control, or are we witnessing the catastrophic failure of our own hubris? We wanted to fix the planet, yet we have only succeeded in blurring the lines between the natural and the artificial. We have created a world where the sun never truly sets, and in doing so, we have lost the silence required for the soul to hear itself. We have traded the majesty of the cosmos for the dim glow of a laboratory experiment. This unnatural light is more than a meteorological anomaly. It is a curiosity gap that forces us to look upward and realize that our dominance is an illusion. We believe that by illuminating the night, we could erase our fear of the unknown. We thought that by engineering the sky, we could escape the consequences of our actions. But nature is not a program to be rewritten. It is a living system that is now responding to our interference with a terrifying, luminous intensity. If we have reached the point where we can no longer distinguish the dawn from the dusk, have we also lost the ability to distinguish truth from deception? We have spent decades trying to, quote, brighten our world. But as the stars disappear behind a veil of man-made particles and solar fury, we are finding that the world is growing darker in the ways that truly matter. The sky is changing. It is speaking in a language of light that we can no longer ignore. The question is no longer whether we can control the heavens, but whether we can survive the consequences of trying. Is this glow a sign of our technological triumph, or is it the final flicker of a civilization that has forgotten its place beneath the Creator's stars? As we look at these images of shattered infrastructure and glowing horizons, a fundamental shift begins to take place within the human heart. It is no longer enough to simply feel afraid. It is no longer enough to be a victim of the circumstances unfolding around us. We are moving beyond the stage of mere observation and into a reality that demands something far deeper, a sense of duty. In the ancient walled cities of the Near East, there was a figure who held the life of every citizen in his hands. He was known as the Watchman. He did not build the walls, and he did not lead the armies. His entire existence was defined by a single, solitary task: to stay awake when others slept, and to look into the darkness for what others could not yet see. The book of Ezekiel, in chapter 33, records a principle of justice that is as chilling as it is profound. It speaks of a law of the watchman. It declares that if the watchman sees the sword coming upon the land and blows the trumpet to warn the people, he has fulfilled his duty. But if he sees the danger, if he recognizes the signs of an approaching enemy and chooses to remain silent, the consequences are catastrophic. The scripture warns that if the sword comes and takes a life because there was no warning, that person dies in their sin, but God will require his blood at the watchman's hand. This is the pivot point for us in 2026. We are no longer just people watching a storm. We have become the watchmen of our generation. When you see the grid failing, when you see the natural order of the sky dissolving into an artificial glow, and when you witness the very boundaries of nature collapsing, you are no longer an innocent bystander. You have been given the gift of sight, and with that gift comes a debt. The blood debt of the watchman is not about having all the answers. It is not about being a hero or a scientist. It is about the simple, terrifying responsibility of the truth. To see a sign and to call it normal is to become complicit in the disaster that follows. To recognize a warning and to scroll past it in silence is to forfeit the protection of your own conscience. We have lived in a culture that rewards indifference. We have been taught that minding our own business is a virtue. But in the face of these simultaneous, relentless events, silence is no longer a neutral position. It is an act of betrayal. Ask yourself, what have you seen? What do you now know that you cannot unknow? Will you blow the trumpet? Or will you hide in the shadows of the silent? Will you warn your neighbor? Or will you wait until the water is at their door? The sword is coming. The signs are here. The debt is yours to pay. The only question that remains is whether you will have the courage to speak before the silence becomes permanent. Observe the motion of your own hand for a moment, the rhythmic, almost unconscious glide of your thumb across a glass screen. In the last few minutes, you have likely scrolled past a record-breaking blizzard, a city submerged by rising tides, and a report of another infrastructure collapse. And yet, your pulse did not quicken. You did not gasp. You did not stop. You looked, you sighed, and you moved on. We often tell ourselves that we are becoming resilient, that we are simply learning to live in a chaotic world. But what is actually happening is far more clinical and far more dangerous. Psychologists call this psychic numbing. It is a biological glitch of the modern age. Human beings were never engineered to bear the weight of global suffering delivered in real time. Our ancestors were designed to feel the pain of a neighbor or a small tribe. We were never meant to process the simultaneous agony of millions. When the scale of a disaster grows too large, our empathy does not expand to meet it. Instead, it collapses. This is not a sign that you are becoming evil or heartless. It is a sign that your internal systems are breaking down. To survive the constant onslaught of tragedy on our screens, your nervous system has tripped a breaker. You have entered a state of emotional saturation where your brain begins to treat a catastrophe as mere background noise, a digital wallpaper of just another disaster. But herein lies the trap. Because we no longer feel the heat of the fire, we have convinced ourselves that the fire has gone out. We mistake our numbness for safety. We assume that because we can scroll past a warning, the warning itself has lost its power. We are essentially living next to a high-speed rail line. Eventually, we stop hearing the roar of the engines, and that is exactly when we are most likely to step onto the tracks. This biological defense mechanism is pushing us toward a point of no return. While our technology allows us to see every corner of a world in crisis, our biology is forcing us to look away. We have traded our sensitivity for a false sense of peace. At the same time, we have accepted the abnormal as our new baseline. But adaptation to a distortion is not survival, it is decay. When the lights flicker and the news reports grow more dire, the most dangerous thing you can do is get used to it. If your brain has stopped sending signals of alarm, it isn't because the danger has passed. It's because the system has been overwhelmed. We are becoming a society that can witness the end of the world and find it boring. If we have reached the point where even the most terrifying signs no longer interrupt our routine, then the mechanism meant to protect us has become the very thing that ensures our destruction. We are not just ignoring the warnings, we are losing the biological capacity to recognize them. If you no longer feel the weight of the world, is it because the world has grown lighter, or because your heart has grown colder? We are being warned not by the thunder, but by our own silence. Are you finally going to wake up, or will you just keep scrolling until there is nothing left to see? While we grapple with freezing infrastructure and unnatural skies, a third sign is appearing, not in the clouds, but on our doorsteps. Across the United States, the invisible line between civilization and the wild is simply vanishing. Black bears are no longer ghosts of the forest. They are rummaging through trash bins in suburban Denver. Coyotes are pacing the highways of Chicago in broad daylight. In the coastal waters of Texas and Florida, sharks are appearing in the shallows, within arm's reach of the shore. Even the birds above our cities have begun to act with a strange, aggressive desperation, swooping down on pedestrians as if the sky itself has become a hostile territory. We label these as incidents. We call them encounters, but we are misreading the map. These animals are not invading our world. They are refugees of a broken order. For centuries, we maintained a buffer zone, a safe, silent distance between our concrete world and the raw wild. We assumed that as long as we stayed in our cities, the wild would remain in its place. But as extreme weather reshapes the landscape and electromagnetic storms scramble natural navigation, that buffer has dissolved. This is a reverse migration, born of necessity and chaos. The forest is no longer a sanctuary, and the sea is no longer a secret. Nature is crossing into human territory because the very foundations of the earth have cracked. They aren't coming to us out of hunger alone. They are coming because the order of the world has been disturbed to its core. They are fleeing a creation that has lost its balance. In several cities, authorities have been forced to issue curfews, not because of civil unrest, but because the streets now belong to creatures that no longer fear our presence. We pushed the boundaries of the earth for decades, assuming nature would simply retreat forever. We believed our lights and our noise would keep the dark at bay. We were wrong. As the wild moves deeper into our neighborhoods, it brings with it a message we have long ignored. If the forest can no longer hold the beasts, and the sky can no longer hold the dark, where do we imagine we will find safety? The contract between man and nature is void. We are now standing face to face with a world that no longer recognizes our dominance. If the land, the sea, and the creatures of the earth are all reacting at once, the question is no longer what is happening to our environment. The question is, what has happened to the world we thought we knew? How much time remains before the point of no return is crossed? As we stand amidst the wreckage of our certainty, we must confront the most dangerous sign of all. It is not the ice choking our highways or the unnatural glow in the heavens. It is the seal being placed upon the human soul. Ancient texts speak of a conscience seared with a hot iron. Think of a severe burn. At first, the pain is unbearable, but as it heals, a thick, leathery scar forms. This tissue is dead to the world. It no longer feels the heat, it no longer feels the cold, and it no longer reacts to the touch. This is the final stage of our psychic numbing. Every time we scroll past a disaster with a shrug, every time we accept the abnormal as the new baseline, we are pressing that hot iron a little deeper into our spirit. The true catastrophe is not that the world is burning, it is that we can no longer feel the heat. When our conscience becomes a layer of unfeeling scar tissue, we lose the only compass we have to find our way back to the truth. But there is a blueprint for restoration that has stood for millennia, one that has nothing to do with building stronger walls or better power grids. 2 Chronicles 7:14 declares, "If my people, who are called by my name, will humble themselves and pray, and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven, and I will forgive their sin and will heal their land." Notice the order of this promise. The healing of the land, the settling of the storms, and the restoration of the boundaries does not begin with engineering. It begins with a return. It begins with the courage to feel again. We have spent decades trying to fix the planet while our hearts grew cold. But the signs around us are not demanding panic. They are demanding honesty. They are an invitation to return to a humility we lost long ago. The question is no longer what will happen next, But what will happen to you? Will you soften your heart today? Or will you continue to ignore the warnings until the silence is all that remains? History shows that the greatest collapses do not begin with destruction, but with indifference. The clock is ticking, and the choice is yours.